Today we're analyzing a pretty fundamental shift in emergency medical services. We're seeing blood transfusions, something that always happened in the trauma bay,
Yeah.
now starting directly in the ambulance.
Yeah.
So our objective is to look at four evidence-based realities of giving blood before a patient ever reaches the hospital.
That's exactly right. We're seeing this move away from the old model of, stabilize and transport with just intravenous fluids,
Right.
to a model of distributed care where we're using actual biological resuscitation out in the field.
So let's start with survival. What is the real quantifiable impact of pre-hospital blood on patient mortality?
The impact is that it creates what are called unexpected survivors.
Unexpected survivors.
Yes, and we see this laid out very clearly in a multi-institution study from Clement and his colleagues.
How are you defining an unexpected survivor here in this specific context?
Well, these are patients whose injuries are so severe that our standard statistical models predict death.
So the probability of them dying is almost certain.
It approaches 100%, and yet these patients survive all the way to discharge.
And the Clemens study found a specific statistical gain for these patients.
They did. It found that trauma patients who received blood before hospital arrival were twice as likely to be one of these unexpected survivors.
Twice as likely. That's a huge increase for the sickest patients. What's the physiological mechanism driving that?
The main driver is a very quick improvement in the patient's shock index.
Can you define the shock index for us and explain its function here?
Of course, the shock index is simply the ratio of heart rate to systolic blood pressure. It's a very sensitive marker for hemodynamic stability.
And why does giving blood instead of just standard crystalloid fluids improve that index so much better during transport?
Because with crystalloids, you might get a temporary bump in blood pressure, but the heart rate stays high. There's an oxygen debt. Pre-hospital blood addresses both volume and oxygenation. So it brings that whole ratio, the shock index, down much more effectively.
So why does a lower shock index matter so much before they even arrive at the trauma center?
It indicates reduced cardiac strain. It means the organs are still being perfused with oxygenated blood.
You're keeping the system going.
Right. And most importantly, it stops that physiological spiral into irreversible shock before the patient even enters the emergency department.
So it's interrupting the entire pathology of hemorrhagic shock.
Exactly. It's changing the patient's entire trajectory from decompensated to stabilizing.
Okay, that brings us to our second point. If it's so effective, why do traditional hospital metrics seem to fail to capture this success?
It's because our current metrics, they depend on the vital signs that are recorded when the patient arrives at the emergency department.
And which metrics specifically are we talking about here?
Mortality prediction models. The big one is the trauma injury severity score.
Okay, so explain this paradox. How does a successful pre-hospital treatment interact with something like the trauma injury severity score?
This is what we call the data paradox. The pre-hospital blood stabilizes the patient while they're en route.
So they arrive looking better.
Exactly. The patient arrives with improved vital signs. So the hospital's data model just records a stable patient.
And how does the model interpret that stability?
It assumes the initial injury wasn't as severe as it really was. It calculates a lower risk of mortality based on those arrival vitals.
So what's the result of this data blind spot?
The intervention itself masks the severity of the condition just treated.
So the paramedics save the patient in the field.
Yes, but the scoring system looks at them on arrival and basically categorizes them as low risk.
What did the authors of that Clemens study say about this specific issue?
They concluded that you just can't use emergency department vital signs to accurately predict the mortality benefits for these patients.
Because the data is, in a way, contaminated by the success of the treatment.
Precisely.
What's the systemic implication of that for, hospital administration, for quality auditing?
The implication is that our quality auditing infrastructure is lagging behind the clinical innovation. It's very difficult to get funding or to scale a program if your standard metrics can't even measure its life-saving impact.
Right, you can't manage what you can't measure.
Exactly. We need new metrics that actually account for what happens before the hospital.
Let's move to the evidence around timing. The official clinical trial evidence is often described as mixed. Why is that?
Dr. Nicole Boston, who is the medical director for the LA County EMS agency, she describes the major trial data as murky.
Murky.
Some studies show a clear benefit, but others, they don't show any statistical significance.
So how does Dr. Boston resolve that conflict in the data?
She resolves it by looking at transport times. The benefit becomes really clear statistically significant when transport times go over 20 minutes.
20 minutes. That feels like a very short window. Why is that the threshold?
Well, if the transport is short, say under 20 minutes, the patient often gets to the trauma bay before the difference between blood and saline becomes lethal.
But after 20 minutes?
After 20 minutes, the lack of oxygen carrying capacity becomes the deciding factor.
How does that 20-minute mark for pre-hospital blood compare to the timelines for getting blood inside the hospital?
And this is the critical comparison. In Los Angeles County, the median time to start a transfusion inside the hospital is 35 minutes.
Let me repeat that. A median of 35 minutes from the moment they arrive at the door to the first drop of blood.
That's correct. And that includes registration, typing, and cross-matching, delivery from the blood bank. All of it.
So giving it in the field completely bypasses that delay.
It eliminates the door-to-needle time entirely. The patient gets the product immediately when they need it most.
And what clinical outcomes does the data from Braverman and his colleagues support when that timeline is met?
The Braverman data points to 3 key outcomes. First, a greater improvement in the shock index, which we already discussed.
Okay, and the second?
A reduction in the need for massive transfusions later on in the hospital.
Why would giving blood early reduce the need for more blood later?
Because it prevents coagulopathy. When you correct the shock early, you stop the patient's blood from losing its ability to clot. You stop that vicious cycle of ongoing bleeding.
And the third outcome that Braverman identified?
A clear reduction in early mortality for patients in hemorrhagic shock. We're talking about death within the first 6 to 24 hours.
So what's the final takeaway on the evidence then?
It's that the reality on the ground validates this for longer transports. That's what resolves the ambiguity in the big trial data. You have to target the intervention to the right time window.
Now, implementing this, that requires a lot of systems engineering. What's the biggest logistical challenge?
The challenge is managing a perishable biological resource in the field without wasting it.
Right. Blood products are scarce. They're expensive.
Exactly. And they have a limited shelf life and very strict temperature requirements.
So how did the pilot program in Los Angeles County solve that problem of waste?
They developed a really smart reverse logistics model.
A reverse logistics model. Can you describe the timeline for that protocol?
Sure. Blood units are carried in the ambulance until they are 14 days away from their expiration date.
Okay, so that still leaves a 2-week shelf life.
Precisely.
And what happens at that 14-day mark?
The units are taken out of the ambulance and returned to a partner hospital, specifically Harbor UCLA.
And what does Harbor UCLA do with that returned blood?
It's immediately integrated right back into the hospital's general inventory. It's then used for in-hospital patients who need transfusions.
So the goal is essentially zero waste.
It ensures that the resource is always utilized, never discarded. The ambulance is really just a forward storage location, not a final destination for the product.
For an approach like this village approach, who are the mandatory partners?
You need independent organizations to really integrate their operations. First, you have the fire departments that actually operate the EMS units.
And you need the suppliers.
Yes, the blood banks. In this case, it was the San Diego Blood Bank.
And finally, the receivers.
The receiving trauma centers. All 3 of these groups have to agree on the rotation schedule, the chain of custody, everything.
When this program was first proposed, what was the primary fear from the hospital-based physicians?
Their biggest fear was that a pre-hospital program like this would deplete their own in-house blood supply.
A concern about resource allocation, especially during a shortage.
Yes. They were worried that putting units out on ambulances would mean the trauma bay shelves would be empty when they needed it.
And how is that fear addressed?
Through that rotation protocol we just discussed, it required a lot of trust building, a lot of agreement on the risks versus the benefits across everyone involved. The data ended up showing the rotation actually kept the hospital supply fresher by constantly cycling the units.
This really redefines the ambulance then. It's not just a vehicle anymore, it's an extension of the trauma bay.
That is the operational conclusion, yes. We're pushing these high acuity capabilities farther forward right into the field.
And that points to the future challenge.
It does. It's not really about proving the medical worth anymore. I think that clinical question has been answered.
So what is the remaining barrier?
It's about building the financial and the data infrastructure to actually support this kind of distributed care.
Explain the financial gap.
Well, our current reimbursement models are all built around hospital-based care. We need new models that can reimburse EMS agencies for the high cost of maintaining and administering blood products.
And the data infrastructure gap.
We need unified patient records.
Right.
Records that span from the pre-hospital phase right into the hospital phase, so we can finally eliminate that data paradox we talked about earlier.
So as this practice continues to expand, how do we need to redefine where the hospital actually begins?
That is the core structural question we have to answer now. The perimeter of the hospital is no longer its physical walls.
It begins at the point of patient contact.
Correct.
We've analyzed the survival rates, the data paradox, the critical evidence on timing, and the logistics.
These are the four realities shaping this new standard of care.